Welcome everybody and thank you for being with us. We at Uruk PM have been hosting Uruk Education and Orientation webinar for the past months. We are pleased today to have Mr. Bill Duncan with us, who will be presenting the topic 7 Steps to Better Benefit Realization as part of Uruk Education series. As the discipline of project management matures, sponsors are asking project manager to move past scope, cost, time, and stakeholder satisfaction, and to include benefit realization in their thinking. In this webinar, Mr. Duncan will share with us his unique approach to benefit realization and cover it from the perspective of the project manager. Mr. Duncan is recognized as one of the world-leading experts on the theory and practice of project management. He was the primary author of the original BIMPO guide and responsible for various roles with the GPM and the IPMA in the US. Welcome, Mr. Duncan, and thank you for being with us here. I'd like to remind everybody that you can leave your question in the chat area, so Mr. Duncan can go back and look at it and we can answer your questions. We also have a question and answer at the end of the presentation. So Mr. Duncan will answer all your questions. So without further ado, this is Mr. Duncan. You can have your screen.
I will try to answer all your questions. Let's get started here. In the past, I've had some trouble with the timing on advancing the slide. So if that continues today, I'll probably drop out of full screen mode and just physically advance the slides through PowerPoint, but just warning you about that. I usually like to answer questions during the presentation, but that sometimes gets a little bit harder, a little bit hard to do. I will not be looking at your chat questions until the end. If you have something that you feel you absolutely positively have to know before I continue, and before we can continue, then feel free to interrupt, but also be prepared to have me tell you that we'll address that later or we'll get back to it, or I'd rather hold that question for later. I want to repeat one of the things from the introduction. This is from the perspective of the project manager, not from the perspective of the benefit owner or the product owner or different kinds of roles within the project. From my perspective, it's what you need to know as a project manager to help support benefits realization and to deliver better benefits realization for your organization. All right. To start with, I like to view benefits realization as a system, as interconnected parts. And I understand that this slide is maybe a little bit busy, but it contains the major topics that we're going to be talking about. We're going to start out by talking about understanding strategy, then we're going to move into understanding benefits realization and progress around the outer circle there in a clockwise fashion. I do have a list of the 7 steps at the end of the presentation, and we will make the slides available to anybody who wants a copy. All right, let's start with understanding strategy. Strategy for many people, especially project managers who tend to be more in the middle to lower levels of management in most organizations, is kind of something that's a big thing that senior managers do, and it's not for them. But you really need to understand the strategic planning process if you want to think and perform effectively in support of benefits realization. Now, this is a very simplified view of strategy, but I think it's one that's quite helpful. The first thing is that you want to provide guidance that is both specific enough to implement as well as generic enough to provide some flexibility. In the same way that the project plan should not be reviewed as a straitjacket, the same is true for your organization's strategic plan. Second, we need to understand that part of strategy is maintaining the base resources, and the example that's usually used is to keep the lights on. To have a wonderful strategy and then have all your plants shut down because you forgot to pay the electric bill obviously doesn't make too much sense. Then this last bullet comes from a guy colleague of mine from many years ago, and a guy named Vic Rosenberg, who's, I think, one of the most brilliant people I've ever come across. Vic describes strategy as building from the resources you have to the resources that you need in order to achieve your vision. There are lots of definitions of what strategy is and strategic planning and so on, but I absolutely love this one because it's simple and it allows you to do a couple of things. If you're not involved with strategic planning, you can basically infer or deduce what the strategy is by looking at what management is doing using a very simple model. And I'll show that on the next slide. We call this a structured strategy statement. We start with our current resources, which in this case is an excess of cash. We take some action. We want to purchase smaller firms, maybe competitors, maybe close to competitors, but we've got the big Pac-Man eating the little Pac-Man here. So we are in acquisition mode. And the result is that we have more staff, more customers, and hopefully as a result of that, we have more ideas. So this is a very simple way to understand or display the strategy that's going on. In this case, we're acquiring companies, not just for the sake of acquiring them, but so we can get their resources, so we can get their customers, and in particular, when it comes to the people that get their ideas. So if you're saying nobody's telling me anything, I don't understand the strategy of the organization, you can use this structure to figure it out by looking at what management is doing. Sometimes you discover that management doesn't know what they're doing, or that management is very inconsistent. But that's still useful, I think, for you as a project manager because you understand the environment that you're in. I'll share a couple of other things related to supporting strategy that I think project managers should be aware of. I maintain the strategic direction should be both documented and distributed. It's very often documented somewhere, but not distributed. People in the organization don't always know what the strategy is. I worked with a client in Germany a couple of years ago, and we suggested that they ought to share the strategy. This is just within one business unit of the company. And we said, well, we really think you ought to share your strategy with your employees. And they said, well, we're kind of concerned because we have a really high turnover rate. Most of the employees who leave go to our competitors. And if we shared our strategy with them, they'd take it with them to their competitor. And we said, well, why is the turnover rate so high? They said, well, we really don't know. We said, does your human resources department conduct exit interviews? They said, yeah, we think so. Can we talk to HR? Sure. We went in and talked to HR and said, why are people leaving this particular business unit? HR said, because they feel that nobody trusts them, because nobody tells them what's going on, because they're not sharing the strategy. And we went back to management. We said, you got a vicious loop here. You know, you're afraid to share the strategy because people are leaving, but the fact of the matter is people are leaving because you're not sharing the strategy. So we convinced them to share at least key elements of the strategy, and it actually cut their turnover rate in half within the first year. So that's an argument that you can use with your management if they're not sharing what's going on. It's also important that not only selection of projects, but also prioritization of projects is driven by the current strategic direction. I think this is necessary from the project manager's perspective to understand this so that they can make good decisions in support of the strategy. I think it's also necessary for projects that are approved and funded to be supported as planned. There's certainly nothing that's worse from the project manager's perspective than to think that you're going to have this amount of money or this number of people to run your project and then discover that it's cut in half or cut by 20% or what the other number is. The reason I bring this up is that support for benefits realization is usually one of the first thing that disappears from a project. The project manager is, I think, correctly more focused on scope, cost, and schedule. They should also be considering benefits realization. And if they don't have adequate funding, that's something they stop worrying about. And finally, good project management, I think, is generally invisible. people don't notice when the project manager does their job right. Project finishes on time, finishes on schedule, finishes on schedule, finishes within budget, basically delivers the full scope, and everybody says, oh, cool, nothing to get excited about. That's what you're supposed to do. All right. But I think it's important for the organization to recognize when the project manager does what they're supposed to do, and also to take a look at project managers who are not performing effectively and make sure that something is done to address that. Could be training, could be coaching, could be firing, don't really care. But the organization's got to look at it, because otherwise you're sending the wrong message to project managers. All right, step number 2, you also got to understand what benefits realization is all about. It's not a challenging concept. Here's a very simple flow where we talk about starting at strategic objectives in the upper left. Strategic objectives lead to approval of projects. Projects produce capabilities. Those capabilities may result in organizational changes. The organizational changes are expected to deliver benefits. Organizational changes may also deliver disbenefits. And then the benefits and disbenefits together come back and feed the strategic objectives. So we have a continuing loop where the objectives are modified, updated as necessary. And as we complete projects, we're delivering capabilities to the organization, a new product, a new plant, a new software application, whatever the case may be. And then we have these connections for a feedback loop. The one thing that's actually missing from this is something that we call enablers or enabling changes. Simplest example, I think, is to consider training for a new application system or for a new product, training your salespeople how to sell a new product, for example. I believe that in general, the enabling changes should be included as part of the project scope, so that we ensure that they are delivered and support the capabilities. In many organizations, that doesn't happen. The enabling changes are treated as a separate project. The work is not coordinated, or sometimes it just doesn't happen at all. And the project manager delivers the capabilities, but they aren't able to actually deliver the benefits because the enablers weren't there. All right. Now, this is not necessarily in sequence, but this is another important step to be aware of. We have to both design and implement a reliable process. For benefits realization, I believe you want to start with a pilot project. And as you see here, not necessarily the most important project you have, but not the least either. And not the most risky, and also not the least risky either. We want something kind of in the middle, so we can use it as an exemplar or as an example. We want a project that has a reasonable chance of success, so that we don't have the project blow up in our faces and then benefits realization is not within anybody's brain. And we want a team that understands benefits realization and that is committed to it, so that they will support the pilot project. We need to create a process. We want to require measurable benefits in the business case for all of the projects that we approve. We want a benefits realization management plan. This just goes along with hopefully your other management plans, cost management, schedule management, and so on. On many smaller projects, you may not have a large, complex management plans for any of these topics, but you should at least have a couple of sentences somewhere that's formally documented that says, this is how we're going to go about realizing benefits on this project. May not be within your scope to actually deliver the benefits as the project manager. In fact, in most projects, it's not. But you need to be thinking about how those benefits will be realized, because that's the reason your project has funding. Doesn't have funding to keep you and your team happy. It has funding to get those benefits. I want to make sure that roles and responsibilities are clearly articulated. I don't want the project manager blamed for something that the sponsor should be doing, and so on. We want to train the people who are involved so that they understand what's expected of them. All right, now we get to the beginning of the hard part. We need to identify both benefits and disbenefits. Doesn't have to be hard, but it needs to be done. I've given you a template here. And when I teach many topics in project management, I will say you don't have to use this template forever. But when you're getting started, use the template because it makes sure that you're doing it right. You're not leaving anything out. So take a look through this, both the components on the left and the example on the right. Benefits are about stakeholders. So we want to identify who the stakeholder is. And a benefit is a positive effect. We want a measurable item. All right, what's the thing we're going to measure? We want a comparison, and then we want a number. It's got to have a number. If it doesn't have a number, it ain't there. Okay, don't even think about it. Put it somewhere else. And I like to see a date as well so that everything is clear. This benefit statement structure is basically the same. Somebody will be negatively affected, and in what way? Again, measurable item, this case, lost time for training of approximately 30 to 40 hours per salesperson during the year in which we release this product. Now, some categories and examples for benefits and disbenefits. These are probably not too surprising to any of you, but basically financial benefits, operational benefits, and most people look at. But there may also be a question of managerial benefits. Are we simply giving people better information so that they can make better decisions? Is there a competitive issue? Are we looking for more market share? Are we looking to innovate and create a new market? Those types of things. And sometimes there are organizational benefits. We're interested in developing patents, creating intellectual property. I've done a lot of work with IT organizations where one of the main benefits expected from a project is to develop experience with a new technology so that the organization is better able to determine if it can be used effectively on their projects. Now, when it comes to valuing the benefits, part of the process here, all right, we start out with a question. I kind of said this before, I'm going to repeat it. Can it be measured? If the answer is yes, continue. If the answer is no, stop. We're not going to look at this item. If it can't be measured, having it there may make you feel better. Lots of people like to throw things out like morale, all right, or increased efficiency. You can't have that in your benefits realization plan because you don't have any way to know whether it's going to be realized or not. If you think morale is important, then figure out a way to measure it. Right? Survey staff before the capability is introduced, before the project is done. Survey them again afterwards and tell us how much you expect their morale to be improved as a result of the project. In my mind, benefits are always estimates. And to me, estimates are always a range. I happen to like 3-point estimates, low, likely, and high. You can use 2-point for ranges. You can use a single number with a plus minus. I think low, likely, and high forces a good thinking process better than the other approaches. But as long as you've identified your benefits as a range, I'm okay with that. We also want to estimate countable things. That feeds back to our measure. People, staff, customers, whatever the case may be, financial resources, whether it's cash or something else, and then documents is something that reduction of document counts or how we process documents or paper documents. There are a whole bunch of things there that can be counted as well. I worked with a project once where we said one of our objectives, the expected benefits, was to reduce the number of pages involved with the process by 90%. And a lot of people laughed at us when we started out that we couldn't do it. But we got a little bit creative about a couple of things, and we actually made the process 100% electronic. So we achieved the benefits expected from 90%. We actually made it 100%. All right, so I've listed a couple of the things here. What are we estimating? The values of both benefits, and never forget the disbenefits. We also want to estimate when they'll be realized. And the last point is something that I think a lot of people don't consider, and that's the difficulty of realization. Is this something that's easy, or is this something that's going to be enormously difficult? Number 6, I'd like to see a benefits realization management plan. Again, it doesn't have to be elaborate, doesn't have to be fancy. There are templates out there. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But here's the basic concepts. We talked about roles and responsibilities before as part of designing the process. Obviously, we want to document the expected benefits as well as the disbenefits. We want to identify what the enablers are. Even if they are part of the scope of the project, they still need to be identified. If they are not part of the scope of the project, they need to be red flagged, and we need to identify who is going to be responsible for them. Then, of course, we have the measurements, how we're actually going to measure it, and then a reporting and review process. We also want our benefits prioritized. This is a very simple chart that I think enables a much better focus. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, we're saying benefits that are easy to realize and that have a high impact are the ones where we should focus our attention. Those are the benefits we should really be trying to realize. Things in the lower left-hand quadrant, I don't care. I'm going to ignore those, at least as a project manager. They might happen. Somebody might make them happen, but I'm really not going to worry too much about it. Then you see secondary focus in the upper left-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner. Again, those are the things we want to consider if we have the time, if we have the resources, if they're responsibility. And then I've added to the typical 2x2 matrix, and I've included the little brown box in there. It said time permitting. If I have the time to worry about them, to do the enablers, to support them, then I will address those things that have low ease of realization, but high benefits. Last but not least, we need to track the benefits. If we're not tracking the benefits, we won't know whether we've accomplished that. I like to use a very simple rag chart, red, amber, green. You can define your own terms, your own meanings for what each of the columns mean. And I've simplified the benefit description for the left-hand column. And this is just basically telling us what we're thinking. I would expect most of the time during the project, your expectation about delivery would be yellow, because there would be a caution. You're not certain for sure that the benefits can be delivered or not, but that's really up to you. Just make sure you define what the red, amber, and green mean so that everybody understands. Some people also like to add an arrow to each of the boxes, an up or down, to show that it's getting better or getting worse. That's an option, depends upon what you like to do. All right, here's the 7 steps in order, fully expressed. Understand your strategy, understand benefits realization, design and implement a reliable process, identify both the benefits and the disbenefits, value them, document what you've done in a benefits realization management plan, and then finally you track the benefits. So that's it for me. And I am open for questions. I think Ricardo's got his hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Bill, thank you. Could you explain again the role of the enablers? Please.
I think to me, the easiest way to explain it and the best example is training. If you have a new application system, if you have a new product that you want your salespeople to sell, you need to train them about the features of the product, about how to sell, about who the best customers are. If you're introducing an automated system like the Uruk platform, you need to be able to train them on how to use the platform. Other enablers might be things like database conversions or updates if you're dealing with software. Other enablers might be permits for a construction project. If you got a new drug development, an enabler would be government approval. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Bill, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bill,
And I'll just
Yeah, go ahead.
repeat quickly what I said earlier. I always prefer to have the enablers as part of the project scope. It won't always happen. All right. And there are certainly some cases, like if it's a commercial software application, you're probably not going to be doing the training. Somebody else is going to be doing the training. So it would not be part of your scope. But maybe developing the training materials should be part of your scope. So that's a question. But if possible, I want the enablers part of the scope so that the project manager can ensure delivery of everything that's necessary to meet the success criteria. Monir, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to clarify and add some more example for Ricardo. I'll give you an example, and we've seen it many times. We want to build a museum. We want to build a hotel. Yeah. And basically what happened, the owner will hire the engineering team. They will do the engineering design construction. And then at the end of the day, that facility is ready. The museum is ready, which is obviously now becoming a capability so we can generate benefit from it. However, what we find out is that they don't have, because most project management literature doesn't talk about operation readiness. What Bill is talking about as enabler, I call it in my methodology, operation readiness, right? We don't do any of that. And operation readiness could include hiring staff, for example, for a chemical plant, hiring the operator, training the operator, installing the IT system, anything that you need to, once you can get access to that facility, you can operate it. So I've seen it many times, even on mega project, you know, the whole museum costs $3-4 billion, is built and ready to go, but we cannot start operating because we don't have operating permit. Why we don't have operating permit? Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in advance, wasn't done before. So it's often ignored that part of the project that should be happening exactly within the project scope in parallel. Now, it might not be under the authority of the PM per se, but it could be an operation rep, right? But as long as someone within the project scope, before we close the scope, before we hand over the facility, implementation work and operation readiness work should be happening in parallel. And once ready with both, we can basically do the handover where the project, maybe engineering construction team or the software team would transfer the product to other people. But there has to be training, there has to be some maybe maintenance procedure if it is a facility, all of these things. And it's amazing that most literature on project management doesn't cover that part. The concept of we need to have these operation readiness happening in parallel. And in situation, I think Amr can probably elaborate, where he's working on hotel project, often enough, the operation readiness is done maybe by the operator, which might be the hotel company, whereas the engineering construction is done by an owner. And if they are not integrated, you're gonna get a gap.
Yeah, let me share the story from a paper that I read. I probably shouldn't even tell you how long ago it was, but I'm going to estimate at least 35 years, maybe 40. But it came from the Miller Brewing Company. And most of their construction projects involved opening a new plant, opening a new line in an existing plant, and so on. And they found that when they made the project management team responsible for the first 2 weeks of operation, that their operational problems almost completely disappeared. But it used to be the project team said, okay, we're done, bye, and walked away and left it to plant operations management. And when there were problems, when things weren't working right, they needed to call somebody, try and figure out a way to get it fixed. But when the company made the project management team responsible for those first 2 weeks of operation, included that within the scope of the project, it made the project team much more aware of what the operational issues are, made them responsible for it, and it completely changed the process. Anyone else?
Sorry, John?
Thank you. Hi, Bill. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was short and concise and to the point. Just a quick question from my side. Why document the disbenefits in the benefits realization plan?
Because you want to make sure that people aren't overly optimistic. You know,
Oh, okay.
there are, take a very simple example. If I've got a new product that I want to develop and I'm predicting that it's going to do $1 million in sale in the first year. But if that $1 million is actually cannibalizing 800,000 from another product that we offer, that's not a very good project to fund because the incremental sales are very, very small. And if you don't do that, what you get is somebody saying, oh, I expect we're going to increase sales by $1 million. And, you know, the project's only going to cost $250,000. That's a pretty good return on investment. When in fact, if you include the disbenefits, what you're saying is say, wait a minute, if you do this project, we're going to lose $50,000 next year. That doesn't make sense.
Okay, thanks. But that would feed into the business case anyway. I
It
assume,
should,
so,
but I mean,
yeah.
I include disbenefits in the business case always as well. And
Okay.
I like to see consistency. I mean, if your benefits realization plan only talks about the benefits, then it tends to get people who may not have seen the business case or may have forgotten about the business case. It gets them overly excited about the project.
Okay. And then just one more question. With the benefits realization plan, oftentimes, as you mentioned, the project team's responsibility comes to an end at a certain point, and then it gets handed over to the operations. What would be a smooth transition, because we would have created this plan, what would be a smooth transition to them to continue maintaining the benefits realization plan?
Okay, I think that really depends upon what the product is that you're releasing. And I gave you the example from Miller Brewing Company, which we're making the project team responsible for the first 2 weeks of operation, was their way of transitioning into operations. I don't know the specifics, but I've done some project management training for a couple of Middle Eastern electric companies, and the guys who are building the substations always talk about planning the, I don't know what the proper term was, planning the initialization of the substation or getting it connected to where the power is coming in and the power is coming out and stuff as being a key part of what they're doing. So I think that's going to depend upon the nature of the project. What kind of projects are you doing, Soji?
Mostly IT. So that's why there's a big dependency on the operations team to take
Okay.
over. So.
Probably in your environment, one of the key steps is to get approval from operations. There's usually some sort of an acceptance test that the operations unit has to go through before they will accept your application into production. There may also be training of users or an implementation plan where you want to start, for example, depending upon the nature of the product, maybe one city, and then you move your implementation support team around to office by office so that it gets implemented in stages. Again, it really depends upon the application and specifically what you're doing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, Amr, you got a question next?
Yeah. Hi, Bill. We have been using the term project objectives in the business case and the project management plan. Is it the same as benefit realization plan, or there is a difference between both?
Okay, I gotta give you an answer to this question that you're probably not gonna like. Monir might have a variable. I hate the term project objectives. I think it really confuses people because an awful lot of people, I shouldn't say it, because it means different things to different people. I once heard an argument that almost got violent, physical, between two people who were arguing whether objectives were a subset of goals or whether goals were a subset of objectives. I don't care. All right. When I look at objectives, I know some people who refer to the project deliverables as an objective. I hear other people use the term objectives to refer to what I call product success criteria. All right. So I think it depends. If your project objectives look like something that's going to happen after the project is over, if they're more oriented towards delivering or meeting the business expectations, providing outcomes to support the business, then your project objectives are probably what I'm calling benefits.
Okay, so we can say the output of the project is the project objectives, while the outcome can be the benefits, right?
Yeah, I always think of the output as a thing. And I use the term tangible, even though some people think tangible has to be physical, but I'll use the term, it can be documentable. For example, to me, a departmental reorganization is still tangible. I have an org chart, I have people, with different roles and responsibilities. So that's the output. To me, the output, the unique result is what you have when the project is over. And then typically benefits, product success criteria, outcomes, to me, those are the things that happen after the project is over. In some environments, for example, a lot of agile software development, those are overlapped, right? Where we're trying to realize benefits earlier in the software development process. And that can create a little bit of confusion. Yeah, those are the terms that I use. I got an output or a result at the end of the project, and the outcomes or benefits come later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I will share just one real quick story with you. I started to tell this with the question from enablers before, but let me share it now since we got a little bit of time. I was just teaching a class to an international group, and there was a guy in the class from Nigeria. Great big guy, full of energy, really funny. And when we were talking about defining the scope of the project, he says, I'm building a new university. And I thought I was being very clever when I asked him what was included in the scope. And I said, for example, is it just the buildings or does it include the furnishings as well? He says, it includes the buildings and the furnishings. I was a little bit surprised because most construction projects don't include desks and chairs and stuff for the students. So I said, well, what else does it include? And he started listing off the things. He said it includes the curriculum, it includes the professors, it includes the roads to get the construction teams to the construction site. And I don't remember everything else that he mentioned. I think wasn't just the teaching buildings, it was also the dormitories. And he might have even included recruiting the students to attend the university for all I know. But that's an example where I thought I was being really clever. And it turned out I didn't have a clue about how huge the scope of his project was. Monir, Nada, anything to add?
Munir, you're mute.
To comment on what the story you just said, that's what sometimes we get into the debate, what's the difference between a program and a project, and people will think, the university is not a project, it's a program. But in reality, to me is that, do I need to deliver what define a project? Do I need to deliver all of that work, the building, the facilities, the curriculum, all of that, right? In order to open that university door, that means it is one project, right?
Yeah, I would call it a mega project too.
Yeah, it definitely is a large project. And we often, again, that goes back to the issue of outcome versus benefit. I think one of the problem many people, when we were learning project management, we still have a lot of people think of pure, I call it pure project management, right? Which is pure technical project management, is that our job in project management is to deliver the output and we don't care about anything else, right? Well, if that's the job and that's the job description in your organization, that's fine. However, in that case, someone needs to look at the whole spectrum of the life cycle of the project and focus on the outcome and the benefit management. And I know in the past there were debate is that benefit management doesn't belong to projects. Project management is only recognized at the program level. So that's another piece of the debate that relates to the topic here. Is benefit management only exist at the program level, or it's also at the project level?
Yeah, here's the way I always address that, Monir, and I've probably been answering that question or some form of it for 30 years. Typically, in most domains, the project manager is not responsible for delivering the outcomes, for delivering the benefits. But I maintain that they are morally and ethically responsible for being aware and alert to issues related to benefits management, because that's why the project is being done. You may not be, if, for example, you're responsible for a new product. Might be software, might be hardware, might be a building. You can't make sure that the owner of that product actually obtains the benefits that they're going to get. But you're often in a position to ask the right question. All right. Have you thought about this? Who's handling training? A classic example in a lot of high-tech firms is the development team doesn't coordinate with the marketing team. So the development team finishes the product and the marketing team says, oh, gee, we haven't prepared our marketing materials yet. So you've got a project that's sitting on the shelf for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, that's not generating any revenue. And that's not the project manager's fault directly. But if the project manager isn't going to the sales department or the marketing department on a regular basis and saying, we're going to be done in July, we're going to be done in July, when are the materials going to be ready? And if marketing says, oh, we're not going to have the materials ready, then the project manager, I believe, has an obligation to go to senior management and say, hey, these guys are screwing up our project. Right. Don't blame me when the project fails because marketing wasn't able to deliver it in time or support it effectively.
Correct. This is what we are calling the enablers and what we call operation readiness. For example, in software project and these type of product-oriented project, we include going to market strategy and going to market plan as part of the project.
Yeah. And again, that's why I think as much as possible, we want to see the enablers as part of the project scope so that it is clearly the project manager who's responsible for making sure that the capabilities can be delivered and used effectively.
And I like the term enablers. I haven't been using that. That's a good term to use in relationship to operation readiness and getting ready for the end product.
I think I was going to say stole it. I should probably say borrowed, but maybe stole it from Axelos. Axelos has a really nice chart that we adapted for the Sustainable Project Management book. If you want to give me a minute, I can probably find it. Hold on just a second. The benefits management flow is a little bit of a, here we go.
I'm looking at the book as well. So.
Oh, yeah. I didn't like the way their chart was drawn, so I basically redrew it. They had projects up at the top, and I wanted to see strategy up at the top. Yeah. Hold on a sec.
While Bill is looking at the Sustainable Project Management Guide that Bill was one of the authors in their methodological process there. So GP, I mean, and you can get book like this from the GPM website, I think free of charge, downloaded as a PDF.
Yes, and the P5 standard is pretty good as well.
Yeah, I remember this chart. Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I redrew it because I wanted to have the organizational objectives up at the top rather than down at the bottom. And then you see the benefits down at the lower right, and you see the words enable here, enable. So I pulled those out as a separate box. We had a discussion on LinkedIn. There were a couple of suggestions for how the chart might be improved.
I remember that was a while back. Yeah.
Yeah, and I never got it. Whoops. I never got around to trying to incorporate any of those changes, but I still think as it is, it's pretty effective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the comments I felt were possible clarifications or improvements as opposed to correcting any errors or any mistakes in the overall chart. Okay.
All right. Any other question from anyone?
Okay.
I'm putting a poll up. Sorry, it doesn't work.
Hey, this is George. Sorry I was tied up in another meeting. How are you?
Hi,
Everyone?
George.
Now, a quick question. The biggest things that I'm seeing is organizations don't know their objectives. That is sometimes my biggest struggle. They start off with an objective and then you move on. Oh, then it changes. Then it changes. I don't know what your thoughts on this, just especially when it comes to the sustainability and those parts.
You're referring to the last chart I had up?
Yeah.
Well, I just saw the poll came in. Am I allowed to say yes, it was great?
Yeah, you can vote on the poll and everybody. So.
Let me try and answer your question, George. All right, you got organizational objectives up on the left. Is that what you were asking about?
Exactly, Bill. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's certainly a fair comment. There are places where the organizational objectives are not clear, but you weren't here for the front end of the project of the presentation, right?
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Let me do this. Hold on a second. I will. Oops, here we go. I always get the sequence in which I have to do things screwed up. Okay. Here's a chart that I put up fairly early in the presentation, George, talking about writing a structured strategy statement. And I think that's a good way for organizations to define and document their strategy, but it's also an approach that you can take to deduce, or some people prefer the word infer, to infer what the organizational strategy is. And that's about the only thing that you can do. If you're seeing inconsistent strategies, if you're seeing behaviors from senior management that are inconsistent with the stated strategy, then about all you can do if you're in the role of project manager is surface the issue and ask people for clarification. Now, sometimes people tell you to go away and shut up. And my advice to those people is find another job. And to me, it's just that simple. Does that help?
Thanks. Actually, that's the key part. I think when we just compromise and we don't ask those questions, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, that's if you were listening to the last part of the discussion where we were talking about the project manager has the obligation to ask questions
Yeah.
about the enablers and about the outcomes and who's going to support them and all that kind of stuff. That's basically what you're saying. If you're like, if your organization says, go away, leave me alone, I don't want to worry about that. Basically what they're doing is they're setting you up for failure. The project manager is going to get blamed even if they weren't directly responsible for it. So there-
No, thanks. Thank you.
sure.
Any last minute question?
Yeah, Nada and Monir, I saw a question in the chat that said, will the presentation be
Oh, shared. Yeah,
emailed to us? I'm happy to send it to you if you want to share it with folks.
sure. Yeah, we will put, I just put in the chat as well. We typically post all recording for webinar on our YouTube channel. You will find this webinar tomorrow. You can also find, if you go back to about a few weeks ago, you will find another webinar from Bill. And there are webinars also from Mark Moore and Sandra Hoskins. So all of these webinars we are recording and we are hosting on the Applied Product Management channel on YouTube.
Yeah. If you don't know Mark, he's active on LinkedIn and he writes articles that he typically refers to as the counterfeit ring, where he talks about mistakes that people make. And if you're on LinkedIn, he's a good guy to either follow or connect with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and after his webinar that he did, he ended up writing about 5 articles or 6 articles related to the topic of the webinar. So that if you want more insight, you can find those articles as well.
Yeah, Sandra's cool as well, but I don't think she's nearly as active on LinkedIn as Mark is.
Yeah, no, she is not. Yeah. All right. Going once, going twice.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. Everybody have a great day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.